Okay, I see some people that don't speak Polish, so I'll have to speak in English. Yay. But, yeah. I don't know why I'm punished to be speaking at 10 a.m. the next day, which is probably the worst, right? Because otherwise we would all be sleeping. In general, I think that the second day of a conference should start, I don't know, 12, 1 p.m., something like that. But okay, it's not the topic of my talk. I've changed the topic a bit. Just wait till lightning talks, please. Oh, by the way, are here any people that don't know what Karawka is? If so, please raise your hands. Great. We will have lightning talk about it. But again, I'm going to talk about the new Ruby that will come. My name is Maciej Mensfeld. I'm the creator of Karawka. And I do a few other things, but I don't want to do a product placement, so you can just Google it out if you want. But I'm also an organizer of Krakow Ruby user group. If you want to come to Krakow, give a talk, drink beer with us, you can just ping me, and I think we will figure something out. You can find me on Twitter. If you have any questions, you can always mail me as well. The funny thing is that we're going to talk about Ruby 2 before we go to the new Ruby, because without knowing a bit about internals of Ruby, there's no point about talking about new internals. So part of my talk is about the Ruby 2 point whatever there is now, 2.4 point something, about the objects ownership management, global interpreter lock, garbage collection, global method cache, how deployment works, a bit about limitations and immutability. Then we'll go to the Ruby 3.0, guild, channels, immutability as well, a bit, because I assume that you saw the Koichi's talk, right? Who didn't see the Koichi talk, please raise your hands. Okay, so I'll focus on it a bit more then. I'll talk a bit about challenges that come with both designing and building new Ruby and building software that will be Ruby 3.0 ready, or a software that will be just easier to translate into new Ruby, to gain as much as we can about it, a bit about comparing those two, and yeah, that's all. Yeah, everything I'm saying is based on too many assumptions. My talks with Ruby core team members, recently I've talked with Hiroshi Shibata in Warsaw. I think it was like 2 weeks ago or something like that. And it's also based on any documentation you can find on Ruby 2.5, 2.6, 3.0, and stuff like that. Their Redmine, Backtracker, all the things. So yeah, let's start with, I won't have any C stuff, so it won't be heavy. It's good for both sides, you and me. We'll start with objects ownership management. It will be really easy because there is none. So yeah, if you get a reference pointer to an object, you can just do whatever you want with it. You can even unfreeze it. Once, if you freeze it, you can just switch some stuff in memory, and you will have unfrozen object, which I had to do because this guy freezes classes, and then they don't work with RSpec the way I had to use them, so I just unfroze them. And it But the idea about the concept behind freezing stuff is great. So just don't unfreeze stuff. Please don't. And there is a global interpreter log. Who doesn't know how it works? Please raise your hands. Okay, one guy, so it will be fast. It is just a log. Around Ruby code. So Ruby programmers won't have concurrent problems. They still have them, so apparently it's not working as expected in all the cases. But we have mutexes, we have other things that we can use inside the language. But it protects Ruby internals from race conditions, which is really important. And here's a bit of outdated illustration of how it works, but it works also similar in 2.4. So it just maps Ruby internal threads into operating system threads, and it has this global interpreter log. It was way more shittier in the old Ruby, because from the operating system point of view, you would have a single thread, and it was really, really slow. JVM, Truffle Ruby, many other don't care at all. So it's sometimes much better to just take JRuby or Rubinius, maybe Truffle Ruby, but it's not production ready. But it looks really interesting. Well, the good thing about global interpreter log is that it is not bound to I/O operations, which means that if you do some I/O stuff, reading from the database, writing from the database, operations like that can run in parallel because they don't run in Ruby. What you do, you basically outsource stuff into the operating system. So Ruby can do multiple things because it's not Ruby that is doing the job. It's the operating system. We have Ruby garbage collector. I don't know how many of you know the difference in between the old garbage collector that Ruby used to have and the current one. Who knows the difference? Please raise your hands. Great. Finally, something that you don't know. So Ruby had a really simple garbage collector. It would just stop all the things, and it would check all the things. So it would say, hey, we need to stop executing whatever we are executing, and let's just check all the objects, whether or not they are being used, whether or not they need to stay, or we can just remove them. And it would take a long time to do so. So what the guys introduced was generational garbage collector. They somehow figured out, probably based on some benchmarks and usage examples, that most of the time our objects don't live too long. Let's take Rails. You have parameters, you get them, you do something with the stuff, and then you don't need it anymore. And if you think about it, most of Ruby-based software is designed that way, except frozen classes, well, classes in general, and a few other things. Something is created, blah, 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 we throw it away. And based on this assumption, the Ruby core team designed a new garbage collector that just checks only small part of all the objects frequently, and from time to time it checks all of it. And those small checks are quite fast, and it just increments the counter on objects. How long does it live? And most of objects don't live longer than I think 4 or 3 iterations of the minor garbage collector. And from time to time we have the major garbage collector, which also garbage collects symbols, which I think is stupid, because it came because Ruby programmers are lazy, or I don't know why, and they cast stuff to symbols even when they get data based on which they cast from the outside world. And I did it many times as well, and I had many memory leaks in 1.8 point something times, like 10 gigabytes of nothing in memory. And then you try to debug, and you see that you have a lot of symbols that look like your incoming data and what the hell is going on, and then you can see this code that you're really smart and you're casting everything to symbols because you want to use symbols everywhere because they are so super cool. So instead of fixing the community, they decided that it is easier and faster to just fix the garbage collector and remove symbols as well. So, but it works in general. And we have my favorite thing, which is global method cache. Do you know what it is? Who knows what it is? Please. 2 guys, great. Global method cache is a cache. Yeah, and it is being used to find base source of code you want to execute. For example, when you do an inheritance and you want to execute something from your class, quite often it's not the class that you're using that is that contains the method. It's something above. The same goes with the composition because you have modules, mix, and stuff like that. And Ruby needs to find the place where the method is. And when it finds it, it just puts it into a cache because it's a quite expensive operation. And it does not need to do it again. And yeah, it works like this with fixed num and integer. So when it finds it, it knows that it's from here. So it's just executing it directly, hitting the cache, saving a lot of time. But the bad thing is that Ruby programmers aren't aware that they invalidate it quite often. They, when they use some specific Ruby features or do some specific things, they invalidate it, and then Ruby gets slower. And the bad thing is that the global method cache has an impact on all the threads that you're running. So if you have a sidekick with, I don't know, default 25 threads, and you constantly invalidate stuff in them, you'll see a huge performance drop down in all the threads that use those methods that you invalidate, or objects or classes. They fixed partially this, and it works way better with Ruby 2.3 or 2.4, I think. But it still has a big impact on it. And the impact is like 25%. Here you have part of my benchmark from 2 years ago. This is the execution without invalidating the method cache. And here's the same code with the method cache invalidation. So you might not be aware of it, but from time to time, you can break things by just using, I don't know, OpenStruct or doing meta-programming in runtime, doing crazy things like injecting new functionalities into instances of objects, right? I don't know, I saw it a few times that you get a device current user in Rails, and then in some special context, you want to inject some functionalities. So you just inject them into an instance because you don't want to have them on a class level, because most of the time this user is not using it. So you just inject it somewhere somehow into instance, then this instance is being garbage collected, and it happens on each request. And then things get slower. Okay, Ruby deployment. Just don't do it. Don't use OpenStruct. Don't use weird meta-programming that changes stuff on runtime. It is most of the time bad decision by design, but also bad decision by performance. And a few words about deployment. We're just used to single process role per process, which means that most of the time when we deploy a Ruby process, it's either a Puma or Sidekick or Karavka or whatever else. But you don't see deployment infrastructure nor techniques to deploy a single process that would have Puma, Sidekick, and something else. It's kind of hard to do, and it doesn't feel natural in Ruby. It feels natural with a few other languages that you can just deploy a single process and everything will work. But it doesn't work that way in Ruby. So you know, even Heroku and other providers are just used to it. They spin up Puma for you, Sidekick Worker, some other stuff. Yeah, Karavka from 1 week, it works on Heroku. But it has some consequences. Heavy memory usage. Heroku is restarting your processes from time to time because some memory leaks or other things. Long shutdown time. If you have a bigger infrastructure and you need to shut it down, it can take more time, depending also on the infrastructure configuration, but it takes more time than shutting down a single process. And a slow booting up. When I was working a few years ago with a great DevOps and he decided to change a job, he changed the job and we revoked his account on AWS, and somehow his account was hooked up with our production and we removed the whole production cluster. And it was really painful 15 minutes waiting up until everything is up and running. Luckily we didn't remove database. But yeah, it was really painful for us. And Ruby 2.4 immutability. It is not entirely supported by language itself. It's more about the concept of designing things in an immutable way. If you have any questions about it, this guy, yeah, this knows stuff about it, how to do it. You can see it in Dry as well, and a few other libraries. But you can freeze stuff. If you don't unfreeze and if you don't tell people that they can unfreeze, don't tell them, then they will just deal with it, right? You have frozen string literals from Ruby 2.3, which is kind of transition in between 2 and Ruby 3. And you have few gems that provide some functionalities that can be helpful, because Ruby does not provide deep freezing, which means that if you have an array of unfrozen objects and you freeze an array, you freeze an array, but you don't freeze objects inside of it. And you have some cool gems that provide data structures that are either immutable or thread safe, or both. Yet immutable data structures are by default thread safe. Please look at those because they are really, really useful, and they aren't that bad in terms of performance as well. But Ruby 2 has some limitations that it's worth being aware of. Instead of spinning up next server, trying to rebalance, trying to optimize things, sometimes just by understanding and redesigning some small components, you can gain a lot of performance. So we have global interpreter log, we have single process role, we have garbage collection, and yeah, partial lack of parallel execution as long as it's not IO bound stuff. And yeah, Ruby 3.0, it's good because since you didn't watch Koichi's presentation, I will make a short introduction into the new Ruby that is coming in 2020. So basically, it comes down to this. What they want to do is to put Ruby into Ruby, so you have more Ruby inside of Ruby. So we have Ruby 2.5, whatever, inside of a container, and you have many Rubies, and they share memory, and you know, love, peace, things like that. But it's really good. They called it guilds. Koichi called it guilds because they were looking into many solutions, many types of solutions to make Ruby better, to make it support parallel execution, especially without dropping the backward compatibility. Because especially Mats didn't want to achieve what the Python guys did. That they introduced the new version of language that was incompatible with the old one, and the community split it. Now we have people that use 2.7 and 3.0. Some frameworks and stuff are in the old one, some in the new one. And it's just bad for the community. at all. So we have guilds. Each guild has one thread, at least one thread, and one thread needs to have at least one fiber. Who uses fibers? Who at least once used fibers? Yeah, in production, yeah. Okay. Maybe that's good, because we have higher level abstractions, and if you don't go really into details, and you don't do low level stuff like concurrent servers, magical stuff below the business logic, then you shouldn't care about them. Threads will be combined into guilds, and you can think of a guild as a Ruby 2.5. It will work exactly the same way. There won't be parallel execution inside of a guild, but there will be parallel execution in between the guilds. So what you can achieve is that your software from Ruby 2.5 or 7 at the moment will just run in a single guild with as many threads as you had, and it will work exactly as it used to work, as it works now. But on the other hand, you won't have a global interpreter log, you will have giant guild log. That basically will be the same, but inside of a guild. And guilds can't access objects from other guilds. Simple. But they will be able to communicate with each other using channels. If you used Elixir, it's kind of similar to how they do it. You can just do messaging. You can copy data in between guilds. You can send data in between guilds. And there will be more and more recommendations on using immutable data if you want to share it in between guilds, because then it will just work faster. And here's the concept. You have a guild, few threads, yeah, a few more, blah, blah, blah. And an example how it can work. Here you have the giant guild log that blocks threads from the same guild, but a different guild can run on a different core without any interruptions, except the garbage collection, obviously. There's still not, the Ruby core team didn't decide yet on API namings, except the basic names, but the method names to work with channels. So we can't be prepared on that. But we can start designing stuff. I'll get to it in a second. So it will work really nicely with Ruby 3.0. Here's an example that you can just move data using channels in between guilds. So imagine that you just spin up a single process with some background workers. Puma server, you just get a request. You want to do something in the background, and instead of using Redis, you just put it into you send it to a different guild that works somewhere else. And as long as you have enough power, it will do the job, right? You don't need to buffer the stuff into Redis. You can just also copy data, which I think it will be better, because it's just safer. And strings will be immutable by default, so just use the magic command and get used to it. Sharing of immutable structures will be easier, and yeah, it will bring a bit of functional programming, because immutability goes well with functional programming, and I think it's a good direction. There was a nice proposal on making soft typing, optional soft typing, but it was rejected, unfortunately, because I would love to have a feature like that. In some particular cases, you could just, limit other programmers' freedom, and it would be really useful in building frameworks, building jams, stuff like that. But Mats said, no, the ticket number is really easy, you can just Google it later. But there was a really long discussion that I think lasts up until this year. And yeah, there are some challenges in the design of the new Ruby. Since objects will have owners, guilds that own them, now the Ruby interpreter will have to check the ownership, which means that it will have to check, make some additional checks, which means that it will have to use more CPU power on checking stuff all the time. For each object, every time it is being accessed. Yeah. There are some ideas on how to do it on every access. If it was at least once transferred, which would lower the number of checks. Every time something is not frozen or when it's referenced in other guilds, but it still requires more checking. But Ruby already checks some of the things, so maybe if it would be hooked up together, it wouldn't be so bad. It shouldn't be so bad. The question is, will giant guild block will be enough? And how will it behave when you do stuff like redefining methods? Because I can't imagine that you end up with having different versions of your code running at the same time in different guilds, right? If you redefine a method in a guild, it probably will have to stop everything and apply the redefinition on all other objects. And then the question comes, what happens if you stop in the moment the method is being used in another guild? So there are many corner cases like that, and the Ruby core team will have to deal with them. Same goes with the garbage collection. Either we check separately each of the guilds, or we check globally, still more checking. And the same goes for the global method cache. If we invalidate something in one guild, then it will be invalidated in all of them. And I asked Hiroshi about it, and he said that it's probably going to work like that, but Koichi doesn't share too many details on his ideas yet. But the good thing is that maybe finally we won't have to deploy so many processes on so many servers, and we will use way less memory. And that means that we could just, get cheaper servers, and it would work exactly the same, which I'm really looking forward to. The Ruby core team aims to make new Ruby 3 times faster than Ruby 2.0, I think. And they will slowly introduce new concepts, new optimizations. So part of this performance boost will be available before the Ruby 3.0, which I think is really good. But new Ruby will also change the way we deploy stuff, because we will be able to deploy single process, which means that many libraries will have to be changed, right? I don't know, Capistrano, the way we Dockerize stuff, for example, as well, the way we use even Heroku. It will work differently. How, I don't know, but I would love to be able to deploy a single process that would just do everything. I deploy one thing, I have a guild with Pumas, I can have multiple guilds with Sidekick. As long as I don't overuse my CPUs, everything should work, and it should be much more convenient to work with, right? I don't know about monitoring, but I expect that there will be some tools in Ruby, so I would be able to monitor the whole process and guilds, separate guilds. I don't expect we will have hot swapping, but I would love to. I would love to be able to replace parts of the code that's been changed with new ones without having downtimes, without having to shut down the process. Like Smalltalk has feature like that, I think. And I think that bigger systems will just have specified roles per server. There will be some servers with single Puma process that will just serve all the things, some background for Sidekick or whatever. There is a question, will there be some sort of TCP-based protocol? So I would be able to send messages with channels to other servers. Because then we would have something that is similar to how Elixir works, that I have this layer of abstraction and I don't have to care whether or not it's an internal process from the same main process or a process running on a different machine. As long as I'm able to talk to it, I don't have to care, which is really good because then you just add monitoring and you can just spin up AWS instances on premise when you need them. And what we can do, what can we do to get our code maybe not ready, but easier to use when the time comes? More thinking, less coding. And yeah, it's already happening. It's good to think about multi-threading now, the way it works in Ruby. Sorry, I have slides in bad order, but yeah. Free stuff. Not all of it, because mutability has its own big advantages as well, but freeze all the things that you don't need to change. You use Yard, because then you have this typing. There are some people that work on gems that will be able to test based on Yard description of your parameters and return. They will be able to check with RSpec whether or not your methods get proper values and return proper values as well. So when you use Yard, you just describe that you expect parameter of this type, of this class or whatever, and you return, I don't know, string, for example. And if you hook up gem like this into RSpec, RSpec will fail each time you do something that is not being described in Yard. So you can think of it as a bit of typing mechanism, or at least control. You define your methods, you define the API, someone else injects, I don't know, you require string and someone else injects integer. Now, unless you have good tests, you can put something like that on production. If you have Yard and gem, that name I don't remember, but I can give you it later, it will be detected. Design small, flexible components, because if you design stuff with isolation, you'll be able to put stuff of it, part of it, into the background. So you will get a request, and then you can just send this data that you have into a separate guild to do part of the job, get results back, feed it into customer, do something else. And if you have this huge monolithic structure that you cannot make into components, you will have a lot of trouble designing, migrating into new Ruby to gain as much as you can out of its performance. Put this everywhere. Always. Put it, well, in Rubocop, I think it's turned on by default, so just follow it and put it everywhere. I know that it looks bad. I know that we used to have something like that for, I think, Ruby 1.9, the UTF-8. Ruby used to have big problems with UTF-8 or non-UTF-8. I don't remember, but they introduced the magical comment, I think, at 1.9. And well, you had to get used to it, but then there was 2.0 and the message, you can remove all of them, and then you just grab and everything looks nice again. Yeah, it will be compatible, but you will have performance like with Ruby 2.5, 6, if you don't change anything, which is good because you can at least run your software and tell your boss that it's running the new shiny Ruby. But don't try to unlearn locking and multi-threading. It will be still really useful inside of the guilds. Yeah, don't expect Ruby to solve your performance problems for you. And please don't validate method cache. Don't use OpenStruct. Never. Don't use it. It's really bad. Each time you create an instance of an OpenStruct, Even if it has the same structure as a previous object, it will always invalidate the method cache. So if you work heavily with OpenStruct, with many threads, it will get slower and slower. Don't change constants. Don't override them in runtime. People do this from time to time. Don't inject modules into object instances. Just don't do it. Do everything like that during the boot. Inject mixins, define some dynamic methods, stuff like that. Never do it during the runtime. And if you think it's a good idea and it will be just easier, don't think like that. And don't use non-thread safe gems and libraries. I know it's not easy because you will have to look into the source code. And believe me, there are so many bad libraries that, for example, put stuff into constants. And then you don't have a way to use them with multiple threads, because you redefine constant stuff and weird things happen. But sometimes it's just a matter of looking into the source code, opening a single file, and if you see weird stuff, don't use library like this. And that's all. Thank you. Any questions? Yeah?
Earlier you said about the global method cache.
Yeah.
How it's like the method missing? Do you always check that the method doesn't exist up under the inheritance? Or
well, it's based on the name. So if you get it, if it's not able to find it, it will always check all of it. If it knows that it's not able to find it, then it caches this as well. So it has this information that I was not able to find it. I need to use method missing. But there is this the next method that Rubocops tells you to define when you use method missing, and I have I think it has some sort of impact on it. I don't remember the name of this method. Yeah, exactly. So it is somehow related.
So I have a question about the usage of guilds, because you mentioned having Puma and Sidekick, and like big chunks of code in separate execution threads. But would they be lightweight? Would it be possible to implement actor model with guilds and have thousands of them, or is not a use case?
This is the base. This is the idea that they will be lightweight. So you can run as many of them as you want, but we will see. The question is, will it be enough, or it comes down to the initial concept once it is delivered. Personally, I think it won't be enough, at least not in 3.0.0, because then we will just start probably benchmarking it, playing with it. The guys will apply some patches, some performance tweaks. And only then we will see. But I would love to see Celluloid run on it, for example, right?
So one more question. What about this meta-programming part? Are they close to figuring it out? Because between guilds, the objects have to be immutable. Does it mean that the code will have to be immutable as well?
I don't think so. If the global method cache stays global, then probably there will be some sort of locking mechanism that if you redefine something, Ruby will have to wait up until all the threads that are currently running a given method finish, and only then probably it will be just lock down, reapply the method, and run it again, or just replace it once none of the guilds and threads is using a given method. But you will be able to exchange both immutable structures and mutable structures. But I think it will be just smarter and easier to always exchange immutable structures, because then you don't have to worry. And I don't expect medium and senior people to do a lot of runtime meta programming, because I think they feel that it's not the best idea ever. So probably it won't be that bad.
Thanks.
But I expect few crashes in everything that I use. Any more questions? Okay then, thank you.
Thank you.